Up to this point in all of my previous videos, I've looked and concentrated on flying the A320. I've used some of the shortcuts that are built into the aircraft within FSX, and I've concentrated on looking at the navigation of the aircraft to obtain a successful flight from point A to point B. Now it's time to look for a little more realism, and I'm going to look at the state of the aircraft when you board it first thing, when the cockpit is cold and dark, as it is referred to, no avionics, no electronics, engines on stop. So let's see how we set about getting the aircraft up and running with all the avionics running and the two engines running, ready for a flight. So this is a cold, dark cockpit to engines running. Well, here we are, parked on one of the airport aprons, and we are ready for our first start of the morning. The aircraft, as you can see, has been left parked with ground services so that it has a ground power supply. The wheel chocks are in place and the forward cargo door is open and the aft passenger door is open. So we have boarded our aircraft, we are in the cockpit, and we're ready to commence our initial startup of the day. As we take a first look at the cockpit, we can see that it is entirely cold and dark. That means that none of the services, none of the displays, none of the equipment is actually operational. We do have a limited amount of power from here because we are using a ground supply. If I look at the right hand FMC, it is showing me which doors are presently open, the aft right and the front cargo. So I'm going to close those two doors. It's presently saying green open, we'll now say green closed. Front cargo is presently saying green open, now closed. All my doors are now closed. A further look outside the aircraft and we can now see that all our doors are closed. The other side of the aircraft, all doors are closed. The only thing that I have presently connected is the ground power supply. I now need to go through a sequence of operations in order to get the aircraft powered up and ready to start engines. First thing I need to do is to go to the overhead panel. Looking at the overhead panel, I can see that I have an external power supply here showing me that it is on. In slightly closer view, external power on. Just above the external power switch is the main battery switch, which are presently showing as being off. If I left click those, the off lights go out, indicating that I now have the battery switched on. No lights on an Airbus mean no fault. At the bottom of the overhead panel are switches for the auxiliary power unit. If I get that running, I no longer require the ground services. Master switch on and start the APU. After a short period of time, the start light will go out, showing me that it is running. So APU is now available. In close-up, The master switch for the APU is on and power is available. Coming back to my right hand FMC, I'm going to press the return button. I can now look at ground services, aircraft state, aircraft doors, ground services options. Click ground services. It says traffic cones are set, wheel chops are set, external power is connected. I no longer need any of this, so I'm going to click all of those to off. Now, in order to remove wheel chocks, I must apply the aircraft brakes. With the parking brakes on, then I can remove the wheel chocks. The external view of my aircraft now shows me completely free of any ground services, and I am simply parked with the normal parking brake on. Back in the cockpit, I need to get some displays showing on my main panels. There are 4 switches involved. To the left hand corner of the pilot area is a little bank of switches, and in the centre of the throttle quadrant are 2 switches. Zooming in on the pilot's left hand panel, if I rotate these knobs, I will get a basic display, or at least make the display active. If I now go to the center pedestal area and I do the same with these 2 switches, I will make the 2 center displays active. I can adjust the brightness by rotating these knobs up or down. In the top left hand corner of the overhead panel there are these 3 rotating switches. This is the inertia guidance system, or the IRS as it is called in the Airbus. I need to switch those to the center position nav. So I'm going to right click each of these knobs, nav, nav, nav. What that does is initialize the guidance system, and it is going to take approximately 5 minutes for it to align itself with the GPS and similar navigation systems. On the centre display we can now see IR alignment in 4 minutes. This will count down. It takes approximately 5 minutes in total. When it gets to 0, this display will go off, confirming that it is in alignment. The IRS has now been aligned. The main display here is now showing nothing. So I'm now going to click alignment in the FMC. So I am now in the FMC panel on the init page, and I'm going to click align IRS. As soon as I do that, these 2 screens become active. I now have confirmation that the IRS system has been fully aligned and is ready to navigate the aircraft. I now have a fully functioning display throughout the cockpit area, and I'm ready to proceed with my engine starter. In the centre of the overhead are the main switches for the fuel pumps. They are presently showing off. I need to switch those to on. Now, before I can start the engines, I need to take an air supply from the auxiliary power unit. Just above the APU is a 3rd button which says APU bleed. So I have the master switch for the APU on, I have the APU running and therefore available for power, and I have here an APU bleed. And switch that to on. Just behind the throttle levers is a rotating switch. I'm going to right click it so that it is in ignition start position and push engine number 1 lever forward. Left click. When I have done that, the left hand engine display is showing me that the engine is beginning to spool up. And if I look at that engine on the external view, I can see it spooling up and beginning to start. That engine is now running. Let's go back to the cockpit. It's now showing me a figure of 20.8, which is the idling speed figure. Engine number 2 is presently at 0, therefore stationary. So I now need to start engine 2. With the rotating knob still in the ignition start position, switch engine 2 lever to start. Engine 2 is now beginning to spool up. In the external view we can see that engine spooling and beginning to start. Back in the cockpit, I now have both engines rotating on a figure of 20.8. That is the percentage of their thrust. So they are now at idle. Okay, I now have both engines running. I have full avionics display. Returning to the throttle quadrant area, I go back to the engine start switch and I return this to the normal position in the center. It has 3 positions: crank, normal, ignition start. Back to normal. And I am now all set for a successful flight.
meters remaining. 900 meters remaining.